this is Hannah Klein. Welcome to my podcast, Hannah Klein's Time. Before starting my podcast, please download my podcast and introduce my podcast to your friends. As I mentioned today's guest is, I have to say, Dr. Éinat Wylf. I myself was very looking forward to having her as a guest personally, and I recorded the conversation earlier. It was a very it had a lot of information, and also I think that she told me. Well, she talked about a lot misconceptions of Israeli Palestinian conflict. She discussed what Palestinianism is. Well, which is also widely misunderstood among the Japanese media, and so I asked her. Well, this was from a general perspective, but I asked her to discuss from photogenic scope of the conflict, and then I asked her to discuss UNRWA as well. By the way, I have to introduce her. She was a member of Israeli Parliament from 2010 to 2013. She served as chair of the Education Committee and member of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee. She has served as IDF intelligence officer, and also she has vast knowledge on foreign policy, and at the same time Zionism, what Israel is about, why Israel exists, and on UNRWA, the United Nations. She does. I have to. Regarding educational background, Dr. Wylf has Bachelor of Arts from Harvard and PhD from University of Cambridge. I was planning to invite her much earlier, but because of my family reasons, I asked her to choose April, and I was very pleased that she came to my podcast to discuss various issues and topics today. So please listen to our conversation. This was recorded earlier, so it was in the morning by Israeli time. But anyway, please listen. Okay. Thank you so much for coming. I'm really, I
My
feel
pleasure.
that, I have you on my podcast. So, you're a specialist on UNRWA, and, I really,
Yes.
I read your book, The War of Return, and this was something, that was very clear, about the conflicts that's going on. And, I hope that, on this podcast, you could explain Israeli, Palestinian conflict, from general perspective so that people can understand in a sense. And then, I would like to go into because, there are a lot of, discussions on Earth. So yeah, please go ahead. So what do you think? What is your perspective of like Israeli-Palestinian conflict? Like, a lot of people's, a lot of, media, basically say it's an endless, ethnic conflict. So,
I'll give some of what I think are the most basic things that people need to
yes,
understand
yes,
in
yes.
order to understand what the conflict is about.
Mhm.
And I'll explain why, in many ways, it's endless by design. It's
Oh,
not coincidentally endless. It's endless because in every other conflict
mhm,
that has been brought to an end,
mhm.
policies that were put in place were designed to end the conflict.
Oh, yeah.
And I will make the case that when it comes to Israel, the
Mhm.
policies that have been put in place by outside players have actually incentivized continued conflict rather than ending it.
Oh,
But before that, a few fundamental things. The most fundamental things that need to be understand is first and foremost
mhm.
the connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel.
Oh,
Without that, nothing else makes sense. There's a great book by Ben Freeman looking at the Jews as an indigenous people.
mm.
A lot of people make the mistake of thinking that being indigenous merely means that you live in a place for a long time. But
Oh,
that's not the legal and social definition. To be indigenous means that your culture, your language, your rituals, your
oh,
holidays, your calendar
mhm,
are all connected to a
mhm.
place.
Oh,
And in that sense, the Jews are almost the indigenous people.
mm.
You could be exiled, you could come back, you could find yourself sometimes not in this place and again in the place. That doesn't make you indigenous. What makes you indigenous is that your entire culture
Mhm.
is connected to one place and one place only. And
Oh,
in that sense, to be the Jewish people, to be a member of the Jewish nation, it's not a religion, to
mm.
be part of the people and the nation
Mhm.
is to be connected to the land of Israel.
Oh,
The Jewish people have always lived according to the Hebrew calendar,
mm.
which is in many ways an agricultural calendar of the land of Israel. They kept it in different climates, but they kept it because they are a people connected to one land. The
Mhm.
holidays, we have the upcoming holiday for Passover, which
Yes.
is all about the connection of a people with a land, with a God and a covenant, but really about the connection and moving from slavery to freedom ultimately in this land. So that's important to note. The other important thing to note is that in the 7th century,
Mm.
Arabs and Muslims coming from Arabia essentially successfully conquered the entire Levant, Middle East, North Africa, essentially all the way from North Africa to India and the borders of China. Now, those have been hugely successful conquests.
Mhm.
And as a result, today, there's about 500 million people who are Arabic speaking, nearly 2 billion people who are Muslims.
Oh, yeah.
And for most of them, they have come to understand, I would say tragically, mistakenly,
Mm.
to understand their Arab and Muslim identity as one that is about negating the connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel, and about ensuring that this connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel will never have political form in the shape of the modern state of Israel. Those are, first of all, the two fundamental things to understand: the indigenous connection between the people of Israel and the land of Israel, the overwhelming success of the Arab and Islamic conquests of the land of Israel, which is part of the North Africa, the Middle East, the Levant. And of course, to understand the numbers, which I'm sure influence every country in the world, like Japan. You know, in the most basic sense, a lot of people say there are only 15 million Jews in the world. Half of them live in the state of Israel. There are almost 2 billion Muslims, half a billion Arabs among them. Why should we? I mean, who cares? You know, we should go with the bigger numbers. So I would say these are the most fundamental things to understand about the conflict: the history of the people of Israel, the Arab conquests, and the numbers. Now, specifically about the conflict. Over the years, we've come to, from the media, to somehow perceive this conflict as only between Israelis and Palestinians, and Israel appears strong and the Palestinians weak. But this is, again, why I went back to the numbers. The Arabs are 500 million. The Muslims are nearly 2 billion. The Jews are 15 million globally, only half of whom live in Israel. The kind of balance is completely in the other direction. From the beginning, when we reached kind of the end of the 19th and the 20th century, when empires began to collapse, when the idea of states being sovereign became kind of the governing political idea, when various peoples around the world began to establish states as the empires were disappearing, the Jewish people were claiming that right, again, nothing special, a universal right for a people. That's why it's important to understand the Jews are a people, not a religion. Some are religious, but that's not the fundamental understanding of it. And they wanted a state. And again, the only land in which the Jews have ever had a collective connection is with the land of Israel. But because the land, beginning in the 7th century, has been conquered by the Arabs and Muslims, and they've had a vision of the Jews as being of lower status, there was a social and religious view that the Jews cannot be the equals of Arabs and Muslims. And they can certainly not be the political equals. They cannot have a state. And basically from the beginning, as the Jewish people are organizing themselves politically, this is what Zionism is all about, from the word Zion, which is the ancient Jewish Hebrew word for the land of Israel and its capital, Jerusalem. When the Jewish people...
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but like when I think of Zionism, I have known, about Zionism for a long time. And what I think, like when I think of Israel, like, I compare it to Japan, like Shintoism, ultimately, Shintoism became religion, but, it used to be a custom, and so, I mean, it's not strange for me for Jewish people to have Israel, but for some reason, I don't know why, but the media says like there is a power balance, something like this, between the Palestinians,
but
and
but of course it's exactly the opposite. Yeah.
So like, I just hope that you continue, but my opinion about Israel, as you mentioned, about, Israel not being, religion, it's not very strange to me because, like probably, 90%, 98% of the people, in Japan would claim that they're Japanese. But, they go to like, shrines on January 1st, even though they're not religious, so I mean it's a part of like custom for the Japanese, so I mean, it's not actually very strange for me, but for some reason I think that there is a strange bias against the Jewish people and Zionism, so that like as you mentioned, just I hope that you go on with the discussions, but I just wanted to say that it's not very strange to me, what you were saying actually. So yeah, please go on.
course. And by the way, I found over the years that I have an easier time explaining what it means to be Jewish to people who live east of Israel, Hindus, Chinese, Japanese. They have an easier understanding of the idea of a civilization, a culture that has rituals and customs and calendars. And, some people may be more devout, some people less, some people carry out more rituals, but collectively, to understand the idea of a collective people with a historical connection that is a land and a people and customs and rituals, I found over the years that people who live east of Israel have actually an easier time with it than people who are more west, Muslims and Christians, who have a much more universal vision of their systems that is more what they call religion. Now, when the Jews in the modern era want to essentially reestablish themselves in the land as a modern state, after all the empires, the Roman Empire is gone, the British Empire is gone, the Ottoman Empire is gone, when all these empires are finally gone, because the land of Israel is a land that was, because it's in this crossroads of Africa and Asia and Europe, it's a land that's been constantly occupied by empires going back to the Persian, the Babylonian, the Assyrian, and then you have the Hellenic, the Roman, the Byzantine, the Islamic empires, the Ottoman Empire, British. So when finally all these empires are finally gone, the Jewish people are finally able to reclaim and reestablish themselves. But the Arabs essentially refuse the notion that the Jews have an equal status to be a political entity and to have a state. And that is at the core of the conflict. The core of the conflict, and to the credit of Arabs, they've never denied it, and they say it quite clearly, especially if you ask questions. They make it very clear that to them, the idea that the Jewish people as a people have the right to political self-determination, to have statehood, governance in their ancestral territory is anathema. And that is essentially the conflict. I always tell the story. I have a longer talk if people are interested. It's online on YouTube, where I explain my own personal journey in understanding the conflict. That I too came from the notion thinking that Israel is strong and the Palestinians are weak. And if they only had a state, the conflict would be over. And we should just give them a state. And I voted for every Israeli prime minister who tried to give the Palestinians a state. And I see again and again Palestinian leaders not taking it and always going to war and really brutal, violent wars. And I began to ask a simple question: what's going on? What do they want? Because, you don't have examples in history of a people who claim to want independence, self-determination, ending occupation, things like that. And when they're given the chance to get it, they walk away again and again and again and again. You actually don't have such examples. No one's ever happy with the amount of land they have. You have many examples of people who said, you know what, we're going to say yes, we're going to be independent, but we actually deserve to be twice as large, or the land that is now in our neighboring country belongs to us. That is everybody. Everybody thinks they should have more land. I've yet to meet a people that don't think that some other land belongs to them. But ultimately, most people prioritize having independence over constant war. And they say, fine, we're not happy, but the most important thing is to have a state. You don't have an example of people who constantly, again and again and again, say, absolutely no. So when I began to research what's going on, I came across a wonderful quote by the British foreign minister after World War II, where he goes to the British Parliament to explain why Britain, as its empire is declining, Britain was entrusted with the League of Nations after World War I with helping Jews and Arabs across the Levant achieve independence. And Britain helped the Arabs. So Jordan, Iraq, and France helped Syria and Lebanon. They all achieved independence. Mm-hmm. But the one people that they were supposed to also help, the Jews, that's the one people that don't get independence. Mm-hmm. So Britain basically betrayed a trust that it unanimously received from the League of Nations. And it has to explain why it did that. So it basically says, he says, His Majesty's government is faced with an irreconcilable conflict. Oh. Now, this is February 47, which is great because in February 47, all the things that we are told today are the reasons for the conflict. You know, Israel is strong. There are settlements. There's occupation. There's a blockade of Gaza. There's a right-wing government. There's Bibi. The Arabs are refugees. All these things, they didn't exist in February 47. So what's great is that someone looks at what the sides are saying. He didn't invent anything. And he said, the conflict is irreconcilable and there are no excuses. You can't say that it's because of the settlements or because of Bibi. They don't exist at this moment. And he goes on to say, why is the conflict irreconcilable? And he says the following. He says, look, in the land, we have Jews and Arabs, right? The Jews are there because they're the people of the land and they are reclaiming it. The Arabs are there as a result of the 7th century conquest. And he says, in the land, there are Jews and Arabs. And he says each one of them has a top priority. He says, for the Jews, the top priority is to establish a sovereign Jewish state. Great. So the Jews want, in the spirit of the 20th century idea, to have a state for their people, for their nation. And then he says the Arabs, and these are not any Arabs, these are Arabs that will later hijack the name Palestine, which used to be understood as a name connected with the Jews. He says, those Arabs that will later take the name and be known as Palestinians, he says their top priority is, and listen to that, to resist to the last the establishment of Jewish sovereignty in any part of the land. So basically, you don't have a regular ethnic conflict here. You don't have a regular national conflict where both sides want sovereignty and statehood. And, you know, they just want the land and you need to divide it and no one's going to be happy. That's not the case. He's saying we have two groups here. One group, the Jews, want a state. And the other group, as their top priority, they don't want a state. They want the Jews to have nothing. That's their top priority. Their top priority is not to achieve something for themselves, but to ensure that the Jews have nothing. Why? Because it goes back to historical, theological views of Arabs and Muslims about Jews not being their equals. Oh. So, and this is the conflict. And the thing is that if you talk to Arabs, certainly to Palestinians, they will not lie. They will tell you. They will justify it. They will say things, they will say evil things about the Jews and all that, but they will never say that the conflict is about something else. You just need to sometimes ask a few specific questions. And this is where my work on UNRWA comes in. Oh. Because if you look at this notion that
Yeah, it was very shocking about UNRWA. Yeah, just please go on. Yes,
so I'll explain.
I really
Okay, so a bit kind of the background. So the 20th century is quite simple politically. It begins when much of the world is divided between empires. Yes. It ends with much of the world divided between states. Oh. When they're lucky, those states are nation states. They went through a process of self-determination, and the majority group in that state shares a coherent sense of culture, religion, ethnicity, language. You might sometimes have a national minority, that's quite common, but there's a clear national majority, and those are called nation states. When they're unlucky, the receding empire threw together different groups, different ethnic groups, and they have spent the years ever since either in civil war or dictatorship, civil war or dictatorship. We have a lot of countries like that in the region, Iraq, Syria, Lebanon to an extent, many countries in Africa have suffered that fate because they didn't go through a process of self-determination. Okay, so this is the story of the 20th century more broadly, from empires to states. We're lucky nation states. This process is incredibly bloody. That's important to remind people. It involves 2 world wars. You could actually understand the 2 world wars together as the wars that bring an end to the empires and create the states. So 2 world wars, numerous regional civil wars like the breakup of the Indian subcontinent. In the course of this transition from empires to states, new borders are established, new states, and tens of millions of people become refugees.
Oh,
Turks and Bulgarians and Greeks and Poles and Ukrainians and Jews and Hindus and Muslims and Germans. And all these tens of millions of people, typically they flee across the newly created borders to the side that is more similar to them, ethnically, religiously, nationally, linguistically. When those people flee, they've lost land, they've lost homes. Sometimes, as in the case of the Germans, they are expelled after they surrender as part of redrawing the maps. They get the following message. It's tough, it's tragic, and you move on. This is the new world. These are the new borders. Wherever you are, you stay. You can go find your fortune somewhere else, but that's it. It's over. There's one group that doesn't get the memo. And those are the Arab refugees from the war that the Arabs, I would say, stupidly and tragically waged. Because when the British kind of said, look, we failed, we're leaving, the United Nations taking over from the League of Nations said, you know what? Let's just divide the land. There will be one more Arab state after all the Arab states that were already created. There'll be one more Arab state for the Arabs, and there will be a tiny, tiny Jewish state from it was basically just a few territories, barely even contiguous. Yeah. Now, the Jews, because they wanted a state, they were not happy with the very small amount of land that was allocated to them, but they were happy that it's a state, so they said yes. And the Arabs, again, those who will later be called Palestinians, they said, absolutely not. We don't care that we're getting one more Arab state. We care that the Jews have a state, and our top priority is to resist to the last establishment of Jewish sovereignty anywhere in the land. So they go to war. Stupid war, unnecessary war. They could have had an Arab state. No one would have been killed. No one would have been displaced. They could have lived in peace next to a tiny, tiny Jewish state. But no, their top priority was to ensure that there's no Jewish state. They go to war. I would say, again, stupid, unnecessary war. They fail. They fail to achieve their goal of no Jewish state. That goes back to the fact that because the Jews were home, they were fighting for their home. Yeah. And the Arabs didn't believe that. They didn't believe that the Jews would be able to be victorious over 7 Arab invading armies. They couldn't believe it. But the Jews were defending their home. So they fail, and hundreds of thousands of Arabs become refugees. Now, they were supposed to be settled like all the tens of millions of refugees in the world and the places to which they fled, Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. But they say no. If we settle, if we just become Jordanians, Lebanese, Syrians, Egyptians, this means that the war is over, the Jewish state gets to live, and we need to accept our failure. And we're not going to do that. And what they do is essentially they hijack the agency that was supposed to settle them. And here I always like to bring the example of another agency that was established at the same time to settle the Korean refugees. It was called Ankara. There were 3.1 million Korean refugees in the early 50s. That's more than 4 times the number of the Arab refugees. They were all settled. No one went home. That's it. It was a third of UNRWA's budget, which was for the Arab refugees, and because everyone was settled. the Korean refugees got the memo. It's tough, it's tragic, but move on. And look at South Korea today. I know it has its problems, but all in all, a good state.
Yeah.
It could have been the Arabs. It could have been the Palestinians, but no. They hijacked UNRWA. They made sure that it wouldn't settle a single Arab refugee themselves with the support of Arab countries. They ensured that it would never close. UNRWA is still a temporary agency. And they ensured that Western money continues to flow in for them to continue the war against the Jewish state. And that's why I say that the reason that the conflict continues is because unlike every other conflict in the world, where the message was, it's over. It might not be fair, you might have, but it's over. Move on. This is the only conflict in the world where you basically, the side that constantly loses, starts wars and loses, starts war and loses, the Arab side, is constantly told, you don't have to acknowledge that you were defeated. You can try again. Now, all you need to do is basic logic 101 to know that if you are telling the side that constantly wages war and loses, try again, try again, try again, of course you're going to have an endless conflict because you're never telling them enough is enough and it's over. You know, over the years, I've come to notice a difference between what I call doing good and feeling good. A lot of things feel good. They don't do any good. They're just for you to feel good about yourself.
Yeah.
Giving money to UNRWA is one such example.
Oh.
Not only does it do no good, it actually does the opposite of good because it basically tells the Arabs, you don't have to acknowledge that you waged a stupid war and you lost and you have to move on. No, no, no. You didn't lose. Your victory is merely delayed. So keep trying. So as a result, they keep trying. What was October 7th? October 7th was the 5th generation by now of Arab refugees who are not refugees by now, meaning they were born and they're not refugees by any international standard, but it's a 5th generation of people who are being told and funded, keep trying. So they kept trying. So of course you're going to have conflict. If one side never pays a price, never has to acknowledge that they've been defeated, then you're going to have endless war. And I know there's a lot of things about Japan, but one book that I've been using a lot since October 7th is a book about Japan after World War II called Embracing Defeat. And what I love about the title is that it actually reminds people that moments of defeat, of disaster, of ruin can become moments of transformation for good.
Oh,
Japan
yes.
today
Yes.
is a pillar of world peace. For the Palestinians to finally become a peaceful people, they need to embrace defeat. They need to understand that their continued wars against the Jewish state are over. They need to understand that the Jews are home. You know, sometimes you hear words like white European settler colonialists about Israel and Zionism and the Jews.
The protests, right?
None of it is true. You know, Zionism, as I said, is the most decolonial movement. We had to wait for all the empires to be gone to reclaim our land. But all these words are just synonyms for foreigners. So it's basically a way for the Arabs to say, you don't belong here, get out, and we're going to fight you until you leave. But the reason that they constantly fail is that we're not foreigners, we're home. And they keep on like trying to like throw us out, but like we're not foreigners, we're home. And by the way, the Arabs used to know that. Look at Arab and Islamic texts from before the 19th century. They recognize that the people of Israel are connected to the land of Israel, that the Jewish temple stood in the city of Jerusalem. And you now have, which is where I draw hope, you now have, especially in some Gulf states, you have Arabs, Muslims who are beginning to say, of course the Jews are home. Of course the people of Israel belong in the land of Israel. Arabs and Muslims should understand that. So, and this is the only thing that will ever bring peace. I've come to call the ideology that unites the Arabs of Gaza and the West Bank and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon, I've come to call this ideology Palestinianism. And Palestinianism basically has four core tenets. From the river to the sea, from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea, there will be no Jewish state, right? This is the idea of a negative goal. And we are therefore perpetual refugees. This is the idea of we're never going to move on. Generation after generation, we're going to pretend that we're refugees until return. And return is this idea that if anyone ever thought it was just some nostalgia, in the Arab and especially Palestinian telling of it, return is no Jewish state, and it is often imagined like October 7th. Return is always imagined as this brutal invasion and desecration of the Jewish body. If you look at Arab Palestinian texts from the 50s, the 60s, they say things like, we will tear their hearts out of their bodies, their fingernails from their limbs. The idea is that the Jewish state has to be destroyed in the most brutal way possible. So the Palestinianism is basically the idea of we refuse to accept a Jewish state in any size, in any borders, and we're going to keep fighting that state generation after generation until it's gone. That's Palestinianism. And Palestinianism is a terrible ideology. And a bit like the ideology of Nazi Germany, that of Imperial Japan, for peace to be born, that ideology must die.
Yes.
It's a terrible ideology and it must die so that Jews and Arabs can finally live. And that's what UNRWA, this is why UNRWA is so terrible, because UNRWA is the fueling station of Palestinianism.
I believe so.
It gives legitimacy,
Yeah.
it gives money to basically tell the people generation after generation, keep fighting until there's no Jewish state. That's what it is.
It's very, very shocking. I mean, I mean,
agree.
yeah, it's, like when, when I heard of October 7th before, watching all the scenes, it's obviously, like when I just think of because they were promoting children, just saying, kill the Jews, all these terrible things. And it was, that was like about 10 years ago that I learned about it, and my friend was saying, how terrible the United Nations have been. It was very, very shocking.
Yes.
But, I was not surprised because, at the same time, because they're not so different from ISIS to me, what they do, basically, to me. And
Yeah.
at
Oh,
the
yeah,
same time, yeah, please go ahead.
No, I agree. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, so in Gaza, like they're like UNRWA employees. And, I have
Yes.
questions about this because, I basically know that most of the UNRWA employees are Palestinians in Gaza. And, um, like, like, I don't know why, but I heard some, Arabic researchers in Japan saying that like UNRWA has been the core, support for, Gazans. And, I heard other discussions and, only 14% out of 100%, has been, supplying, the like food and all these things to the Gazans right now. And so, I mean, it's not helping. And, another surprising part, about, Gaza was that from almost every home, a lot of a lot of homes, there were puzzles, of how to destroy the Jewish people and how to, kill Jewish people. And also, like there were tunnels, underneath. And at the same time, there were books, written by Hitler, no, Mein Kampf, and other
Mhm.
books about like denying Holocaust. And to me, it's I mean, October 7th clearly is like really Holocaust to me. Like, and so like
Someone
I didn't, yeah,
very
like what do you
quietly.
think of,
Sorry.
like, could you explain what exactly, UNRWA members, roles and what they're doing in Gaza? Because I believe that the United Nations, like Lazzarini, he comes to Japan and say, for example, like, we have to operate in Japan. That was something, I heard before October 7th, and something, I was very angry about, before that, October 7th. I was very much opposing his idea of having, ARA, office in Japan. And, because ARA is not solving any problems. And so, I mean, like what he's doing, I thought he was, a liar. And in Japan, there's an Aura chief saying, Aura is the only organization that's supporting, the Palestinians in Gaza. And another point of, another point, yeah, that, that is misunderstood among the Japanese is about the Palestinians. And you have already explained that. But, they are basically Arabs. And, and you explained about, how, they're called Palestinians. But I'm just very, very, yeah, I would, if you could explain, what, our employees are doing in Gaza exactly, that would be, appreciated.
Certainly.
Mm.
I'm more than happy to expose the entire scam.
Yeah.
First, a bit of background. I talked about UNRWA being hijacked.
Mm,
In the process of UNRWA being hijacked over the years in the 50s and 60s, it
mm,
essentially became a purely Arab organization, increasingly Palestinian. One of the reasons, by the way, that the Arabs begin to call themselves Palestinians has to do with UNRWA. But so now let's call them Palestinians because they begin to be clearly organized around this ideology of no Jewish state and of Palestinianism. Now, as they hijack UNRWA, and they essentially blackmailed the West to keep funding the organization, it's important to know already in the 50s, the US, Britain, which were initially funding UNRWA like UNCRA to settle the Arab refugees, they knew that UNRWA is a failure. And the reason that they knew that UNRWA is a failure is because UNCRA was successful. So they knew what success looked like. Success was settling everyone, closing down, and enough.
mm,
But they saw that UNRWA was not settling anyone. It was just keeping the issue alive. So they knew it was a failure. Like you can look at documents, we bring them in the book from the 50s, where everyone says, this is a failure. We want to close it down. And basically, the Arabs are saying, don't you dare close it down, because they understood, again, that closing it down would mean that they lost the war to destroy the Jewish state, and they refused to acknowledge that defeat. So they were able to blackmail the West because this was the Cold War and oil and all that to essentially keep UNRWA alive and to constantly fund it. But there was no question that UNRWA is only existing to keep the war against the Jewish state alive. So now the West begins to fund it, even though it's not settling a single Arab refugee. And what begins to happen is that UNRWA essentially is taken over by the Arab refugees themselves and becomes this sprawling kind of provider of services of a normal society, education, healthcare, but paid for by the West. And the teachers, the administrators, everyone is a Palestinian. They only have a very, very thin layer at the top, people with European names like Lazzarini, who come and tell a story of the poor Palestinians to Western nations or like Japan that say, oh, they're so poor. Why? They're not poor. By the way, by any measures, they're more educated, they have better services than many Arab countries paid for by the West. But what's happening is, and by the way, the Palestinians say so themselves, even now, that's what they say. They say the money that we get from the West, we get it until there's no Jewish state. Sometimes I show people that there's this big sign outside a neighborhood near Ramallah, which is misnamed a refugee camp, but no one there is a refugee. It's not a camp. It's a bunch of high rises. It's a regular neighborhood, but it's misnamed a refugee camp because this is how they keep it alive. And the entrance says the following: UNRWA services are our right. Listen to the entitlement. They basically says, you Western countries are going to pay for the normal services of any people, education, healthcare, until return. They're not saying you need to pay for us until we have a state. You need to pay for us until there's peace. And you need to pay for us until there's no occupation or something. They're saying you need to pay for us until there's no Jewish state. They're saying that, not me.
Yeah, return to them means that no Jewish state.
Exactly. It's very, and they're very clear about it. So all the UNRWA employees are Palestinian. So what happens is this: the people in Gaza, the teachers, the administrators, they're all Arabs from Gaza.
Yeah.
They never left Gaza. They're not refugees. They're from Gaza. They're the teachers, they're the administrators. They get the money coming in from the West to pay for their salaries. And this means, and by the way, again, you see it in our book, we show that basically what they're saying is that thanks to Western money that funds us, we can focus on butchering Jews because we don't need to run our own economy. And by the way, they said that. They said it after October 7th. They said, we are focused on defeating them, making sure that there's no Jewish state. UNRWA is responsible for the population. So basically, what the West is funding is the continued war against the Jewish state. And that's why I began this whole conversation by saying it's not some magically ethnic conflict that's not ending. It's a conflict that is purposefully funded to only end when the Jewish state is destroyed. That's what's going on. But the only way that the conflict can actually end is if the Arabs, and especially the Palestinians, finally get the memo that the Koreans and the Germans and the Ukrainians and the Hindus and the Muslims received, which is enough. This is, you can live next to the Jewish state, but not on top of it. Enough with this endless war for the destructive goal of no Jewish state. So everyone in Gaza, paid for by UNRWA, is Arab. But the thing is, you're absolutely right. The letters UN remain so powerful that when people hear, oh, UN employees were killed, you imagine some lovely people who came from Norway and Sweden to help the people in Gaza in need. And I'm like, no, this is not Jürgen and Carolina who came to Gaza. This is Ahmed and Fatma, who were born in Gaza, lived all their lives in Gaza, who are very much ideologically committed to Palestinianism, to no Jewish state. This is what they teach in the schools. And they're being paid for by your money so that they can keep fighting the Jewish state generation after generation. Gaza doesn't have a real need for money. Gaza sits on a beautiful part of the Mediterranean, ancient trade routes, great soil. It has everything necessary to be an international trade hub.
Exactly.
The only reason that Gaza constantly needs money is because it wants to continue fighting the Jewish state. So it takes all the money not to build for themselves. It takes all the money in order to turn Gaza into this weaponized landscape to fight the Jewish state. And this is what Japanese money is doing.
Yeah.
And this is what UNRWA covers for. UNRWA is the fueling station of the Palestinianist ideology. UNRWA employees are Arab Palestinians who are paid for by the West so that they can focus on continuing their war to destroy the Jewish state. And if you actually listen to Palestinians, that's what they're saying.
Yes. See, like, that's the part our prime ministers don't understand. Like the last prime minister, and who was the prime minister on October 7th, and this prime minister, the current prime minister especially, never understands. Like, I mean, I just do not understand how much, like he does not understand about this conflict, because he started to compare, this is very shocking, but he started to compare, there's a bombing in Gaza, and it's like, the concentration bombing in Tokyo. Just stop, like it's very, very disgraceful. And also, it's disgraceful that he brings up, World War II in the first place. And another thing is that he does not seem to understand the reason of the conflict, as you explained, Palestinianism, and like, I don't know why, but to me, it sounds like this Palestinianism, is very much discriminative against the Jewish people, like the Jewish, state, or I have to, like, they somehow, to my, in my impression, they look like they somehow, like, they are very much discriminative against the Jewish people or the Jewish nation. And I don't know why they do that. And also, the people, like, when we listen to these pro-Hamas, people on campus, or like those people who deny October 7th. I mean, they're just out of the questions, but they seem like, you know, they don't they they really, really agree, to the idea of Palestinianism, and they practice it in the United States or Europe, which is scary. But after October 7th, though, I know that there have been, such, conflicts over and over and over, between, Gaza, or, Palestinian, like Gaza and basically Israel. But, I decided to say, you know, this is not about the conflict. Israel has the right to exist. And, those victims, especially, I was quite furious at, what had been done. And, before, I saw, what was going on, I just could, just speculate what was going on. And, it was too shocking to me to see. And, like, I see, like the victims' photos, and, like each of them, who attended the music festival, I mean, they are totally innocent people. They were enjoying the music, and I don't understand why they had to be kidnapped. And also, they were brutally murdered. You know, as you mentioned, you mentioned like, how to, brutally murder, the Jewish people, throughout history. But I mean, and, like this term, open air prison, often is used to explain Gaza. And the shocking part, I was reading a newspaper, and they were explaining tunnels, of, the longest tunnel in the world. They're used to get supplies from Egypt. Like, Israel is shutting down that part, like, as if, Israel were doing like some kind of like cruel acts against the Palestinians. I mean, that's all not true. And it's not open prison. Like, I was talking with retired lawyer, who has been to Gaza twice before, Israel left Gaza. And he was saying that, Gazans, are not stuck there. They go out, get out, and also so I mean, where does this open air prison, come from? Like, I just wonder, why, all these, terms, are created by the media, and it's very shocking, that I mean these words are generally used, and they're like believed among those who watch the news. And so, I mean, where does this open air prison come from?
So I'll explain that and also the broader issue. First of all, we know that it's not true because as soon as the war started,
Exactly.
it became very clear that, first of all, Palestinians always had a way to come in and out of Gaza through Israel, through Egypt. By the way, people who've said that over the years have never said anything about Egypt, which shares a border with Gaza. Over the years, I called it the disappearing border with Egypt, because the idea was never to objectively care about the Arabs living in Gaza. The idea was always how to demonize Israel. And in that service, lies and libels have been created again and again. You mentioned, for example, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion. As I'm sure you know, it came to Japan through the Russian-Japanese War. That's about the time when it gets published and it gets translated into Japanese. And I think it remains a book that is widely read in Japan still. It is a book that remains widely read in the Arab world. And in the Arab world, they don't know that it's a Russian forgery. They actually think it's a real serious book that explains how Jews control the world. This is the ideas that they've imported. And over the years, what you've seen is a very strong alliance that was supported by the Soviet Union with the Muslim and Arab countries around this idea of Palestinianism that was based on creating an equation between Israel, Zionism, sometimes just the Star of David, and everything that is evil. So over the decades, Israel Zionism is constantly charged with imperialism and colonialism and apartheid, and then it escalates to Nazism and genocide and, of course, racism and open air prison and collective punishment. All kinds of words are used that are associated with evil. And this is, by the way, this is the traditional Tsarist and then Soviet strategy of presenting the Jews as so uniquely evil that the world needs to get rid of them in order to become a better place. And that's what Palestinianism has supplied. I'm sorry?
Yeah, this is very scary.
It's very scary. You know, I tell people that one of the greatest failures of Holocaust education is, after October 7th, people started using a placard that said, "Keep the world clean," with an image of a Star of David and a trash bin, which is the logical outcome if you're told for decades that Israel and Zionism and the Star of David are evil. then you want to get rid of evil and keep the world clean. And I told people that the greatest failure of Holocaust education is that people might know a lot about the Nazis and the death camps, and they will use words like, concentration camps and all that. But very few people are able to say one key insight, that everything the Nazis did was downstream of one idea, which was keep the world clean. In the case of the Nazis, it was racially clean. In the case of today's people, it is human rights clean. But the idea is always the same. And you're right, it's incredibly dangerous, because once you believe that the world would be better if you got rid of the collective Jew, then everything becomes justified for that goal. And this is why, people don't care. You talked about the people in the music festival and the way they were massacred and tortured and kidnapped. The reason that most people don't care is that if you have been trained for decades to believe that the collective Jew, Israel, Zionism, Star of David is evil, then you want to get rid of that evil and you don't care. You don't care whatever means are used. ISIS means, Nazi means, whatever means are used to get rid of what stands between you and a clean world. So what's interesting to me about Palestinianism is that it uses a lot of lies and libels that get laundered through UN organizations and all that. But on one thing, they will never lie. When the open air prison lie was revealed to be a complete lie, then they changed it to famine and genocide. And, they just keep changing the lies that demonize Israel.
Oh.
There's one thing that they do not lie about, that their entire ideology and identity is tied up with the negation of a Jewish state. You will have several individual courageous Palestinian voices who will say, no, enough with return, enough with the perpetual refugee status. We want to live next to a Jewish state, not on top of it. But they are few courageous individuals. Palestinianism in general unites the Arabs of Gaza and the West Bank and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon and their supporters around the world in the destructive, negative idea of no Jewish state. And on this, they will never lie. They've learned to use words like justice and rights and two states. During the 90s, when Palestinian leaders said two states, we made the assumption that one of the two is the Jewish state, right? That's the whole idea of a two-state solution. One Arab, one Jewish. That's the assumption we made. But in retrospect, we had to check, because that's not what they mean. When they say two states, they say one Arab state in the West Bank and Gaza with not a single Jew, and another Arab state that will replace Israel through this idea of refugee return, which again, no one's a refugee, there's no return, but that's how they imagine it. So actually, in the last century, beyond it even, there has never been an Arab-Palestinian vision of peace where the Jews can have a state of any size anywhere in their ancestral homeland. So you only need to scratch the surface a bit to ask a few questions. If a Palestinian tells you, oh, I support two states, I'm like, really? Is one of the two the Jewish state? Do you understand that this means you're not refugees and there's no such thing as a right of return? Then you'll discover this is where they all fail, again, except for those few courageous individuals. So you only need to ask a few simple questions. For example, recently, when the American president proposed his plan for Gaza, and he said that the people need to be displaced, a bit like Nazi Germany, many Germans had to be displaced, even if they were not individually Nazis, because that's how peace was achieved in Europe, redrawing borders, expelling populations that belonged to those with the terrible ideology. So he said, okay, they will have to leave, and not even expel them like the Germans, just they should be allowed to leave. Suddenly, a lot of Arabs and Gazans said, no, Gaza is our home. And I remember thinking, oh, that's new. It's the first time I'm hearing of it, because for the last 75 years, you've spent billions of dollars telling us that Gaza is not your home, that you are fifth generation Palestine refugees, even though you're not, you're living in Gaza. You've kept on telling us that Gaza is not your home, and Gaza is merely the place from which you're going to ensure that there's no Jewish state, from the river to the sea. So now you're telling us that Gaza is your home? Fine. Let's make that happen. Let's make sure that no one in Gaza is registered by UNRWA as a Palestine refugee. That will be a wonderful step towards peace. So you see, you don't need to do much to expose the lies, to expose the scams. You just need to ask some very specific questions, and then they don't lie.
I see. Well, you mentioned collective, and when I saw October 7th, it seemed like, they were doing some kind of collective punishment, against, I mean, even though it's not punishment, they think that it's the right thing to do, really. It sounded that way, and it was very scary. And, that was the time I realized that, they are totally inferior in what they are thinking, They need to change what they, like as you say. And
That's what I'm saying. It's a terrible, terrible ideology that has only ever brought destruction to the people. And I will say even more than that, it ultimately brought destruction to everyone who supported them. Who supported Palestinianism over the century? Anyone who was against the Jews, right? The Nazis, and then the Pan-Arabists, and then the Soviets, and now the Iranians. And look at what happened to them. They're all in the dustbin of history. I'm pretty sure the Ayatollah regime of Iran will join them shortly. Qatar will probably join them later. Why would anyone still want to continue to support such a terrible, destructive ideology?
Yeah.
Why? And like you said, they believe in it, and they're willing to do everything because they believe in it. And that's what happens. A few years ago, this American rapper, not Kanye, he said something about Hitler believed he was doing something good. And he got a lot of flack for that. And I remember thinking, but he said something so obvious. What's the big deal? Of course, Hitler believed he was doing good. Hitler believed that by annihilating the Jewish people, he was birthing a better world. He believed that there would be a better, cleaner world as a result of what he did. The Nazis believed that they were doing something good. And this is the thing. This is why Palestinianists don't lie, because ultimately they believe that destroying the Jewish state is a good thing. And again, they are supported by this massive repetition of Israel. Zionism is everything that is evil in the world. So of course they believe they're doing something good. And that's why this ideology has to die, because it only ever brings suffering and destruction.
You know what? I have one last question. This is going to be the last question for you because you have to go. But I don't understand, why, now, it's 2025. There are Mein Kampf book in Gaza, like so many, in ordinary homes. I mean, I do not exactly understand why they have Hitler's book now. I mean, it's very, very shocking, and they seem to believe it's a good thing, right? I mean,
Of course, I'll explain. First of all, there's a lot of great scholarship, people like Professor Jeffrey Herf, Matthias Kunzel, who look at the continuing impact of Nazi propaganda in the Arabic language and its impact on Palestinianism to the present. You know, people talk about Hamas being a Muslim Brotherhood movement. But if you look at the Hamas charter, it's 50-50, 50 Muslim Brotherhood, 50% Nazi propaganda. And the thing is this, Germany was denazified. Some of its allies. Japan went through a very thorough process of kind of changing the ideology.
Exactly.
The Arabs, for a variety of reasons, actually got a free pass. You know, the Mufti, who was the leader of the Palestinianists, who cooperated and collaborated with Hitler, especially in the Balkan, he and in Iraq also was instigating a lot of the kind of the violence against the Jews of Iraq, once a great and dominant Jewish community going back to the Babylonian exile. He was supposed to be tried in Nuremberg, but he was able to escape that. And we are actually still paying the price for the fact that the Arab world, and especially the Palestinians, did not go through a process of denazification, did not have to acknowledge that they were defeated, that their side was defeated. And as a result, you see the continuing impact. So again, the protocols of the elders of Zion continues to be. I have a colleague, a diplomat who served in the Arab world, who told me that senior Arab officials will give him the protocols of the elders of Zion as if it's a serious book rather than a Tsarist Russian forgery, as if it's a serious book that explains what the Jews are up to. Mein Kampf, you know, in the Arab world, because of the continuing effect of Nazi propaganda and because the Arab world never went through a process of embracing defeat, denazification, they continue to view these ideas as legitimate ideas. And like we saw on October 7th, they continue to exercise them, believing that it's their duty to finish off what Hitler didn't finish.
Oh my goodness. It's truly scary, you know, and
It is.
I don't believe that Japan should support this. And you know, it's not about, you know,
Of course not.
it's it's terrible and you know, it's terrifying and I believe, you know, I believe that, you know, I think that, you know, majority of the Japanese people should see the reality of what happened, you know, on October 7th and learn about, you know, the history because not many people know about, you know, what happened and you know, they say like, you know, it's you know, a war in the Middle East, you know, all these things, but you know, like now, you know, we have this China, like CCP, you know, this is like an imperial China that we have. And this China controls North Korea. And, you know, you know, China has a lot of problems. And, you know, they think that, you know, Japan is a part of them too. And, you know, you know, you know, Hitler ideology, you know, even though, you know, the word is different, you know, it may be different. We have to defeat imperialism, you know, ultimately. And I believe that, you know, I really believe that, you know, you know, UNRWA's, you know, problem, you know, you know, I think that, you know, the United Nations are really responsible for what happened. But, you know, they don't care. They don't seem to care. And another problem is that we you know, like we cannot allow this Hitler ideology, you know, existing, you know, in the Middle East right now. And I just do not understand, you know, I probably, you know, I think that, you know, a lot of people do not understand this part. And this is very scary to me because, you know, October 7th, it was so scary because it seemed like it was obvious to me what happened, you know, like what happened and what they were thinking, you know, you know, it was about just annihilating, the Jewish state. And, innocent people were, brutally murdered. And what I cannot forgive, another, part is that they took hostages, you know, and even though they are, this deceased or alive, they took hostages, you know, and, I mean, it's, it just, it's beyond what I can express what they are doing right now against Israel, really. And like I'm just shocked at the Western media's bias, and have the Japanese media, as I explained, are reading out Al Jazeera. And they read out, according to Gaza Health Ministry, the Telegraph reported that they they changed the number of the casualties recently. I mean, and they don't report that part. They don't report the part that Hamas lied. I just do not understand all these mechanism of what is going on in the Japanese media. And I really appreciate that you explain Palestinianism, because that's something that has been widely misunderstood. Like they believe that it's a kind of uh belonging to the land. Like it's something different, explain to me. But they were explaining something different, on TV. And so I mean, like you see, I just truly think that Japan should change the idea of what they have to do with UNRWA, really. And also, uh, I hope that they understand Lazarini's lies, really. And I really appreciate for explaining all the general history of the fundamental problems, which is very important. And I mean, it's totally misunderstood, really. So all these things that explained to me, like today, was very important, and I enjoy it. So, I guess that it's about time, and I really appreciate you for coming to my podcast. And so, uh, uh, I hope that people understand, what UNRWA is about, and also what Palestinianism about, as you explained. And yeah, I really appreciate you for coming to my podcast, because I was so anxious. I was so excited that you were coming to my podcast myself. So yeah, I really appreciate, you for coming to my podcast. And I guess it's about time. So I hope that it's in the morning in Israel. So and it's the
Yes.
Passover is coming. So yeah, I have to say that, happy Passover. You know, just, I hope that you have a very, happy Passover with your friends and family, and yeah, I often, celebrate it Easter with my friends. So it's very, like close. So I just hope that, we have a nice time in the Passover. And so thank you very much for coming. And I
Thank
hope
you.
that thank you very much for yeah, I really appreciate you for coming to my podcast. And I hope that you have a nice day. I definitely had to mention Dr. Wilf is the author of The War of Return, um, how Western indulgence of the Palestinian dream has obstructed the path to peace. She co-authored this book, and it has a lot of information about anti-Semitism, Zionism, and um, all right. I I I well, today I heard a lot of her opinions, and I was very much impressed myself. And I hope that you listen to what she says, and please think of the conflict and the nature of the conflict and the wars. You know, why Japan could end the war. You know, it is very important. And um, ultimately, it matters to Japan because um, basically the Japanese lawmakers have total misconceptions about this conflict. And the Japanese media are referring from Gaza Health Ministry. I don't know what that even means, but they're doing that. And they also mention Al Jazeera, which celebrated October 7th. So I hope that, Japanese people make their own decisions at this point. I mean, I cannot change the media, or I don't intend to change all these people who want to make people believe that this is an endless conflict or something that, has to be endless in a sense. Please think of what return means in the Palestinianism and think, do you really think that you believe that in the Palestinianism, and also do you really believe that the sense of return in terms of Palestinianism? I mean, this is ridiculous. Okay? I mean, to me, October 7th, that was the end line. I mean, that was over. I mean, that was too much. Not just too much. There are victims, there are hostages, and why is Israel blamed? Okay? People need to understand what Palestinianism is and also what return means. And I hope there will be better understandings, really. And I hope that Dr. Wylf will speak to the public until they understand. Anyway, I hope you have a nice day. And this was a very important conversation for me, and it was a great opportunity for me to directly ask her various questions. And she kindly answered many questions that I asked. Yes. So please listen to her and think of the conflict, and at the same time, what October 7th was. Okay. So I hope you have a good night in terms of Japan, and I hope you have a good evening in Israel, and I hope you have a good morning in the United States. Good night.